You're listening to Real Life, No Filter, where raw emotions and real moments take center stage. No masks, no filters. Just honest stories about life, love, and everything in between. Get comfortable. We're about to begin. From an early age, Julia learned a simple truth. A woman's lot is a choice between intelligence and beauty. The girl knew perfectly well that she could choose, and her choice fell on intelligence. Before her eyes was a living example, her older sister, Alice. Everyone around admired her beauty, and for good reason. Silky, light brown curls, eyes the colour of a mermaid's lagoon, a figure straight out of a magazine cover. Alice was consumed by her appearance from her youth. She read a lot, but it was glossy magazines with tips on makeup, diets, and other such things. And Alice's friends were just like her. Pretty, but in Julia's opinion, empty creatures. Their mother, who raised two daughters alone, placed great hopes on the elder. "When you marry well, Alice, then we'll live." Julia was very small then, in elementary school. She couldn't grasp how one could shift the responsibility for one's own happiness and well-being onto a stranger. Hadn't her mother, who herself had been burned by marriage, learned anything? Once, mustering courage, Julia asked her mother directly, "You married father for money too, didn't you? And he left us, went to someone younger and prettier, and left nothing because her appetites were bottomless. And now you're teaching Alice the same thing? So she repeats your fate?" "Bite your tongue!" Their mother threw up her hands, as if warding off bad thoughts. "Our Alice is completely different. Firstly, she's young. Secondly, she's much prettier than me. And anyway, she has me. I had to figure everything out myself, but I'll guide her, teach her everything. Everything will be fine for Alice. And for you too, if you listen to me." Julia just sighed heavily. Her mother was beautiful, kind, but far too frivolous. Both her mother and Alice lived in the captivity of sweet illusions, dreaming of a beautiful life, believing that beauty was the only key to female happiness and success, and all that sort of thing. Julia was moulded from a different dough. She was sure. Only hard work opens doors in this life. And the options her mother and sister had in mind, rich benefactors, that was shaky ground, unreliable and illusory. Alice would scoff, calling her younger sister a nerd or bookworm. Their mother didn't give up trying to set Julia on the right path, sincerely believing she wished her daughter well. "I'm worried about your future. How can you not understand? You turned out to be such a beauty. You got the best from me and your father. After you finish school, the main thing is to place you advantageously. Just don't be such a gloomy person. Men like cheerful and smiling women." "My path is the economics faculty, Mom. On my own," Julia replied. "Do you know what the competition is like there?" Alice always started arguing. "You can't get in without connections or genius." "Yes," sighed her mother. "We don't have funds for paid tuition, and the budget. That's fantasy." Julia, however, like one possessed, gnawed at the granite of science, trying not to listen to the skeptics. Day and night, she sat over textbooks, searching for additional courses online, mostly free ones, as her mother, who worked as a cashier in a local supermarket, simply had no money for her daughter's education. Their father remained a ghost in their lives. His contribution was limited to meagre alimony until his daughters came of age. He showed neither warmth nor participation in their fate. Julia knew from childhood she couldn't count on him. Secretly, Julia cherished the hope of meeting her father just once, to talk. She thought, maybe her stubbornness and determination came from him. But he didn't seek meetings. And Julia? Pride wouldn't allow her to intrude, and she was also afraid of meeting the coldness of a blood relative. Her father was a successful businessman, owned a chain of stores, earned well. But he prudently transferred assets to his new wife so that his former family wouldn't claim anything. It was petty and ugly. Julia should have been offended, like her mother and Alice. But there was no anger, only a bitter realization. He was a stranger, completely a stranger, and that said it all. But Julia dreamed to build her own empire, become an economist, start her own business, and one day meet him as an equal, so he would see what she had achieved without him. Her persistence bore fruit. The coveted state-funded faculty opened its doors. How she rejoiced when she saw herself on the list of admitted students. A cry of delight escaped her chest. She jumped to the ceiling in front of the monitor. "Are you crazy?" Alice appeared in the doorway with a baby in her arms. History repeated itself. Ian's father, wealthy but indifferent, bought them off with pathetic alimony. Alice, thrice a single mother, didn't give up, continuing her hunt for a prince. Their mother supported her elder daughter in everything, adored her grandson. It was natural. Julia also enjoyed playing with the little ones when she found the time, but she saw building life on someone else's shoulders is shaky and unreliable. It was time to choose a different path. But Alice, as if by habit, continued browsing dating sites, looking for bigger prey. "I got in," Julia explained the reason for her exultation to her sister. "Wow, so you're leaving for the big city?" Their city was more of a large village, far from the regional centre. Grey, box-like houses, dilapidated barracks, endless private sector. A city on paper, essentially a village. That's why Riverton, the regional capital where Julia's university was located, everyone just called it the city. Their mother was genuinely surprised and happy to learn about her younger daughter's admission. She had already mentally prepared for Julia, after hitting some bumps, to accept her wise advice. But her daughter presented a surprise. "You got in. Well done, daughter." Her mother hugged her tightly. "I'll help you as much as I can. I won't have much money, I'm sorry, but I'll find some for housing and food. And don't forget outfits. It's important in the big city. You'll meet your destiny there too." "Mom, there you go again?" Julia smiled, touched by her sincerity. She knew the price her mother paid for every penny, but she was ready to help. That was worth more than any money. Riverton greeted Julia with the noise of a big city and a student dormitory. The room for 3 wasn't so bad. Her roommates, future teachers, turned out to be kindred spirits, equally driven, absorbed in their studies. A strong friendship developed with Kate, and they stayed in touch even after moving into rented apartments. Studies consumed Julia. Economics was her element, lectures were fascinating, assignments seemed trivial. Soon she discovered a way to earn some money, writing papers on demand. Big money, by student standards, of course. There was no time for entertainment, and money was barely enough. Sometimes longing struck. She wanted to go out, have fun. But every minute was worth its weight in gold. Her mother sent crumbs, knowing it was the lion's share of her modest salary. Julia was immensely grateful. This money was a lifeline. Especially after the 3rd year, when disaster struck. The dormitory became paid. She had to tighten her belt to the limit, but the goal shone like a beacon. But the pre-holiday hustle and bustle turned into a tragedy that divided life into before and after. A call from her sister in the dead of night. On the screen, Alice's shining smile, but a premonition of trouble pricked her. Something's happened to Mom. Hysteria overwhelmed Alice, only sobs and complaints about her own state. Studies faded into the background. Julia rushed home on the first morning bus. At home, Alice was waiting, pale, swollen from tears, with baby Mila in her arms. Thrice, a single mother, whose princes left only children and meagre alimony. To them, she was just a fleeting infatuation. What will happen to me now? How will I manage them, alone? Alice looked at Julia, and everything inside boiled with indignation. They didn't know what was wrong with Mom, and she was only thinking of herself. How did it happen? She was crossing the road in a forbidden place, ran out under a bus. The driver himself is in shock, with a heart attack, while they were sorting it out. They called me late at night. I immediately called you. Is she alive? That was the only thing that mattered. In the hospital, at City General. Julia rushed out of the house, called a taxi. She had to be there. At the hospital, terrible news awaited. Mum was gone. Moments ago, in intensive care. The injuries were incompatible with life. She had been in a coma. A feeling of guilt pierced her. She hadn't made it in time to support her, to hold her hand. She was signing papers when Alice called. Someone brought her to the hospital. Difficult days of the funeral, attempts to bring the grieving Alice back to her senses, the bitter realization of an irreparable loss. Mum was gone. Her father didn't come to the funeral. He knew, but didn't call, didn't offer help. He considered his daughters adults. Legally, his duties ended when they turned 18. There was nothing more to expect. At that moment, Julia finally understood. This man was a stranger. There was no resentment, only emptiness and the cold realization he was not a part of her life. Never was and never would be. Alice, however, was her own flesh and blood. She needed support. For several days, Alice was captive to grief. Julia didn't interfere. Tears heal. Julia took over the care of her nephews and nieces. In their babbling and games, she found solace. They were a living reminder. Life goes on. Duty called her back. The session. Alice gradually recovered, and again, as if by habit, returned to dating sites. Without her mother's shoulder, she was even more afraid. Despite the shock, Julia pulled herself together and passed her session with excellent marks. The place in the dormitory was a salvation, but now she had to pay for it. Expenses for food, clothes, transport were pressing. An attempt to combine studying with working in a cafe failed. Absences, debts, expulsion was looming. She begged her professors for a chance, but the only way out was distance learning. But there were no state-funded places, and paid tuition was an unbearable amount. Unexpectedly, the rector came to her aid. He called her to his office, offered a Solomon-like solution. Good-natured, round-faced, resembling the fairy tale Carlson. "I know about your problems," he said paternally. "You're a bright girl. We can't lose people like you. We'll close the session, maybe not with excellent marks. Take a year's academic leave. I'll help. You'll achieve your goal. You'll come back. I'll support you." Julia hesitated. Quit studying. But the alternative? Expulsion and going back home? Stephen, Alice's new chosen one, a hard-working guy who had accepted her children, was already in charge there. Perhaps they would make it work. But Julia felt like an outsider. She loved her sister, but she valued her solitude, her quiet. She wouldn't find that in a large family, and she didn't want to go back to her hometown, where everything breathed gloom. Riverton had become her home, a city of opportunities. I agree, Julia replied confidently. That's good. The rector beamed. You'll succeed. The main thing is to save up for your studies. We'll be waiting for you in a year. Do you promise? I promise. That same evening, Julia plunged into searching for a job. Money was desperately needed for food, for housing. The instinct for survival spurred her on. Searching in her specialty proved futile. Without a diploma, doors were closed. Julia knew she could prove herself, but her resume was rejected immediately. After a couple of days, it became clear. The dream would have to be postponed. For now, she needed anything. The bar dropped. Offers poured in. Saleswoman, cleaner, waitress. Salaries were ridiculous. Enough to survive, but not for tuition. But she needed work here and now. The choice fell on a bar downtown. Night shifts offered a bonus. Tips helped out. The flexible schedule allowed her to take on student paper orders, both extra income and keeping her brain sharp. All positives. The bar turned out to be a pleasant place. A friendly team, understanding management, decent clientele. It was a rock bar that valued atmosphere and filtered out the undesirables. The main highlight was live music. Every evening the stage came alive. Julia listened with pleasure, sang along. Work turned into a celebration. Of course, you couldn't earn much as a waitress, and she didn't stop looking for a more profitable place. But she knew, even if she left, she would come back here as if to home, to this warm, cozy atmosphere. The bar became a refuge, and new friends helped her cope with the pain of loss. The longing for her mother didn't disappear, but life regained meaning. A fateful meeting awaited her in this very bar. One day the host announced a new band's performance. Robert, the bassist, the heart and brain of the band, songwriter and musician. He stayed in the shadows, but his gaze encompassed everything. He was the unspoken leader, even when the frontman basked in the spotlight. Julia immediately felt an inexplicable attraction to him. It was strange. Now, when her whole life was a struggle for the future, when she couldn't be distracted. But something drew her to this man. He didn't flirt, didn't waste time on empty talk. He was absorbed in music. This focus was captivating. There was something kindred in him. Robert became a frequent visitor, on business or just to relax. Acquaintance was inevitable. But he remained reserved, restrained, showing no open affection. Sometimes their eyes met, but he immediately looked away. She wanted him to notice her as a woman, to pay her a compliment, to show interest. Then she would dare. One day, she appeared next to Robert, not just a friend or colleague. Something special hung between them, tenderness in every look, in every smile. When she leaned against his shoulder, he instinctively, like a kitten, stroked her hair. The gesture was so natural, so theirs. Inside Julia, everything tightened with pain. This was jealousy. With painful meticulousness, Julia began looking for flaws in her. Too skinny, hook nose, mouse tail. How can she compare to me? For the first time, Julia assessed her own appearance. Tall, slender, with legs up to her ears. Her friends had often predicted a modelling career for her, but Julia didn't like showing herself off, considered it humiliating. And this grey mouse turned out to be her rival. Unremarkable in every way, but he looked at her with such tenderness. Next to her, he glowed with happiness. He loved her. It was unbearable. The rival's presence pushed Julia to a desperate step, something that went against her principles. Her shift ended, but Julia stayed. Saturday night. Determination grew with every sip. She needed to wait for a chance. Robert got up. A phone call. The bar was too noisy. He went outside. Julia followed him, as if led by an invisible force. Her heart pounded. Now or never. The other woman stayed inside, laughing with his friends. They were clearly close. Maybe it was serious. But Julia had to try. Otherwise, she would regret it her whole life. Robert stood on the porch, pacing nervously, talking on the phone. Julia watched. His face was serious. But that didn't matter now. She had to approach him. The moment he finished his conversation, Julia stepped out after him. They were alone. "Hi," Julia breathed out. "Hi," Robert replied, a flicker of interest in his eyes. "Do we know each other?" "Yes," Julia nodded. "I need to tell you something." Robert froze, all attention. He could have brushed her off, but his dark, intelligent eyes watched expectantly. "I like you," Julia blurted out, feeling her face flush. "I've liked you for a long time. I'm drawn to you, like a magnet. I don't understand what's happening." She lowered her eyes. It was all said. Now he would politely refuse. Shame burned her. Why had she done this? "Julia?" His voice was soft. Her name sounded like music. He touched her, as if she were a fragile treasure. "Julia? I never even dared to dream of this." He looked at her and smiled. His eyes, usually serious, shone with genuine happiness. He liked her. The answer was a kiss. The world swam before her eyes. He hugged her. Her legs gave way. He held her up. He kissed her, stroked her hair, held her close. "I've been watching you for a long time too, and I'm drawn to you, just as strongly." "But why were you silent? I thought you didn't care." "I was afraid of scaring you away. I thought you liked others, confident, successful, with your beauty. You're unreal. You inspired me. The song Elven Princess is about you." "No way! That's my favorite song. I never would have thought." "Yes, only—" "And that girl, with you, are you a couple?" "A couple?" Robert laughed. "We've been together since the day my parents brought home a pink bundle and said, 'This is your sister.'" "Sister?" Julia burst out laughing. "And I imagined things. That's why I decided to—" "My own sister." Robert held her closer, inhaling the scent of her hair. "She's just passing through. She's been married for a long time. Came to visit her good-for-nothing brother." Their romance began rapidly. It turned out Robert had long felt affection for her, but hesitated, waiting to get on his feet, believing that girls didn't look at failures. The band demanded all his time and energy, but the first earnings had appeared, and prospects were looking good. Paradoxically, for a frontman, Robert was shy with girls. He had plenty of friends. But Julia, she was special. She made him lose his composure. But Julia's step broke through his doubts. They were together. Robert suggested they live together. They chose Julia's modest apartment. He immediately took on all housing and living expenses. It turned out Robert was a talented cook. His creative nature also showed in the kitchen. He was gentle, attentive, absorbed in music, but never forgot about her. They spent hours talking, walking around the city. They discussed his new songs. Sometimes Julia intuitively found the right words. Robert would light up, and Julia was proud. She had a hand in a future hit. Julia drowned in these new feelings. Before Robert, she didn't know what real love was. Studying and survival left no room for it. It was happiness. To feel his embrace, his care, to see admiration in his eyes, to melt from the touch of his strong hands, to know that this man was ready for anything for her. Alice, true to her principles, didn't hide her disapproval. He's a pauper. Nothing to his name. A musician. What kind of job is that? There are tons of one-hit wonder bands. They'll fail. With your looks, you could catch someone like that. You're wasting yourself. Okay, me with 3 kids. I don't have a choice. But you. Julia didn't expect understanding. They were too different. But she didn't need it. She was happy, loved. A kindred soul was beside her. Robert was going through a difficult period, but he was passionate about his idea, worked hard, sought ways. Julia believed in him, supported him. He valued her devotion, said she was a gift from fate. Robert decided on a gamble. Invite a famous band to the city. His guys were supposed to play opening act. It was a chance to make a name for themselves and earn money. But something went wrong. There were few spectators. A festival was roaring in the neighboring region. Robert hadn't considered the competition. He failed big time. Expenses weren't covered. A huge debt hung over Robert. It pained Julia to see him like that, lost, depressed. How could she help? Robert took out a loan, but it wasn't enough. Friends chipped in, but the debt remained huge. And then Julia made a decision. She had meager savings for her studies and her mother's gold jewelry, a gift for her 18th birthday. Selling them, she gathered the necessary sum. Where did you get this? Robert looked at the stacks of money in surprise. A debt was repaid, and insurance from Mum's case came through. Julia lied. She knew. He wouldn't accept the truth. Let him think it wasn't her last money. Thank you. Robert hugged her tightly. I'll return everything, I promise. We'll make it. The debt was paid off, and Robert tackled the band with renewed vigor. And Julia was now paying off the loan. Saving for studies became unrealistic. Her salary at the bar dropped. It was going through tough times. Robert took on the main expenses: housing, food. His income was irregular, sometimes a lot, sometimes nothing. Julia didn't think about tomorrow. She was happy in his love, in his care, giving him all her tenderness and support. If I don't get in this year, I will next year, she convinced herself. The main thing was he was beside her. She didn't know she was capable of such all-consuming love. Their happiness was cut short suddenly. Business trip. Robert, beaming, grabbed her hands. They invited me to America, to write music, for that band. Julia froze. She knew that band, world famous. And they noticed Robert. It was incredible. I'll have to leave. For a long time. His voice trembled with excitement. Do you understand? Julia nodded. She understood. This was his chance. Money, fame, new horizons. But he said, I'll have to. Not we. Feverish preparation began. Band matters, documents, packing. In this hustle, Robert seemed to forget everything. His eyes burned with anticipation. Julia looked at him, and her heart squeezed. He would forget. There, in another world, among new impressions, new people. Maybe he would find someone else. He hugged her tenderly, swore his love, promised to call every day. Time will fly by. We'll keep in touch. I'll earn money, pay off the debt. We'll buy an apartment. Everything will be fine. He believed. Julia saw his sincerity, but her heart told her this was the end. He himself didn't understand yet. The premonition did not deceive her. At first, the calls were daily. He spoke excitedly about his new life. Then the calls became less frequent, and then stopped altogether. Ringing and voicemail. Subscriber is busy. Julia was tormented by anxiety. What if something had happened? But one day she saw him on television, that band's performance, and he was there. Grown up, distant. He was fine. He had simply erased her from his life. Hope flickered. She waited for a call, an explanation. But he disappeared, without a trace. Julia became obsessed with watching music channels. Sometimes she saw him, always in the shadows, but the same girl often appeared beside him, bright, striking. Clearly not just a colleague. There was something between them. It was evident. Jealousy burned for this girl, for his new life. It was painful, unbearable. Resentment choked her. Fear of loneliness gripped her heart. But the pain of losing Robert was overshadowed by more pressing problems. Money was desperately short. Her tiny salary didn't even cover the loan. The bar closed. New owners turned it into a hookah lounge. Julia was left without a job. It was another blow. The bar was more than just work. It was a place of strength, warmth, music. And it was gone. Robert would have understood. Everything was easier with him. But he was far away, in another world, and seemed to have forgotten her. He didn't know about her debts, her dismissal, and it was unlikely he would care. There was no time for introspection. She needed a job, urgently, well paid. Julia scoured the ads, looking for salvation. The landlord was accommodating, but it couldn't last forever. Soon she would be asked to leave. One ad caught her eye. The sum was impressive. It could solve all her problems. But the job itself was unsettling. Caregiver for a sick girl. The diagnosis wasn't specified, but it required round-the-clock care, medication on schedule, procedures. Julia thought about it. She had experience with her nephews and nieces. She loved children. But this was a sick child, seriously ill. Could she handle it? But there was no choice. Julia dialed the number. A calm, male voice answered. Questions, an invitation for an interview. Julia barely slept the night before. This job was her last chance, her lifeline. Fear of failure gripped her. The taxi stopped at the gates of a luxurious mansion in an elite village. She was met by Vera, a woman who turned out to be the housekeeper. She managed the entire house. Victor, the owner, was constantly busy. Victor was waiting in the living room, a tall, well-built man in his 40s, piercing blue eyes, grey at the temples. Well-groomed, reserved. Julia felt awkward, small and insignificant next to him. Good morning. His smile was warm and sincere. Julia's tension dissipated. He seemed surprisingly familiar. Hello, Julia replied. I'm here about the job. I need an assistant for my daughter, Sonia, he said. She is very ill. It's not easy. Doctors come every day. I could hire a nurse, but she's already in too much pain. Too many people in white coats. I want someone else beside her. Young, like you, bright, who can distract her, cheer her up, bring her joy. She needs a friend. Positive emotions are the most important thing now. Looking at you, I think you are just that kind of person. Young, beautiful, with kind eyes. You know how to feel. Julia nodded. She was already eager to see Sonia. I can bring her joy, she thought. I'll find a way. If you're ready to start right now, let's try, Victor said. 3 days trial period. The main thing is that Sonia likes you. Payment will be made either way. Do you agree? Yes, Julia replied confidently. Excellent. Vera will take you to Sonia, and I must go. Vera took Julia to the kitchen. Do you get along with children? Nephews and nieces? That's good. But Sonia, she's special. You probably understood. Very weak, gets tired quickly, hard to engage. But it's necessary to distract her from the pain, from the suffering. And going for walks is a must. The doctors ordered it. I understand. Take me to meet her. They went up to the second floor. The children's room was a real palace for a little princess. A huge window flooded with light, shelves overflowing with toys, a play structure, a luxurious round bed under a pink canopy. Julia had never seen anything like it. All this for one child. Amidst this splendor, Julia didn't immediately see the mistress of the room. In the center of the huge bed, among the toys, lay a little girl. Thin, pale, almost transparent. She couldn't possibly be 7 years old. Huge blue eyes, like her father's, watched with curiosity. She struggled to sit up. "Who is this with you, Vera?" the girl asked in a weak voice. "A new rehabilitation therapist." The word sounded so natural coming from a child. It was strange. "No, sweetie, this is Julia. She'll be your new friend." To play with dolls? A spark flickered in the girl's eyes. "Whatever you want," Julia smiled, feeling pity. "I love to play, but Vera is busy, and Daddy doesn't know how at all." "Adults always have a lot to do." "That's why they're sometimes boring." Sonia smiled, as if sharing a secret. "Boring," Julia nodded. Sonia giggled softly. Vera sighed with relief. "I see you've hit it off. Play, and I'll make lunch. And remember, Sonia, the nurse is coming today." "I remember." Sonia's face clouded over. "More shots?" "You have to, dear." Vera kissed her and left. Julia stayed with the girl. "Well, princess, shall we play?" "My head is spinning." Sonia tiredly sank back onto the pillows. "Read to me." Even a short conversation tired her. She pulled the blanket up, although the room was warm. Julia was struck by the child's weakness. 7-year-old children are bundles of energy. Her nephew Ian, Sonia's age, never sits still. A perpetual motion machine, as Alice calls him. And Sonia just lay there. "What shall we read?" "About princesses." Vera started but didn't finish. It was a beautiful, richly illustrated book, but the story seemed naive and boring to Julia. She hadn't liked such things as a child. "How about we invent our own story about princesses?" A spark lit up in Sonia's eyes. "How?" "I'll start. You continue." Sonia got carried away, inventing incredible adventures. The princess raced in a car, fought dragons. Her imagination flowed freely. She clearly lacked this kind of interaction. Vera returned, and seeing how absorbed they were, she was pleased. She brought lunch, light cream soup, vegetables. "I don't want it." Sonia turned away. "I'm not hungry at all." Vera looked at Julia hopefully. "How about I feed you?" Julia suggested. "Each spoonful is a new adventure for the princess. I'll tell the story. Which will finish first? The food or my stories?" The trick worked. The food finished quickly, but Sonia asked for more. Vera smiled in surprise and left. The nurse entered. Sonia's face clouded over. She was almost asleep, but it was time for procedures. "Another shot?" Sonia asked hopelessly. The nurse nodded sympathetically. "I'll be quick. Don't be afraid. Then you can sleep." Vera led Julia away. "You're not needed now." Vera took Julia to the kitchen. Hot coffee and fresh pie waited on the table. I see Sonia likes you. Vera smiled. The previous nanny didn't work out, but you found a way immediately. I've already spoken to Victor. He's very happy and told me to take good care of you. I'm happy too, Julia replied. But I feel so sorry for Sonia. My nephews and nieces are bundles of energy, and it's terrifying. What do the doctors say? Nothing definite. Vera shook her head. They haven't given a diagnosis, just alleviating the symptoms. She'll feel better after the shot. Then you can go for a walk. And where is Sonia's mother? She's gone. Vera sighed heavily. Lena died. The birth was difficult. The doctors saved the baby, didn't keep an eye on the mother. And she herself didn't complain. Was afraid for her daughter. The next day, fever, intensive care. Her heart couldn't take it, a rare complication. Sonia was also in intensive care, premature. It was a terrible time. Yes, it's a tragedy. Let me tell you everything. Vera could barely hold back tears. You'll likely be with us for a while. You should know. Victor grew up in an ideal family. Loving parents, caring grandparents. He had everything. His own room, the sea every summer, friends, a gold medalist. His parents spared nothing. The best tutors, language camps abroad. They were already old, couldn't have children for a long time. When hope had almost faded, Victor was born, the only, long-awaited child. He wasn't ashamed of their age, was proud of his father, a famous entrepreneur, his mother, a chief doctor. They were respected. It never occurred to him to be ashamed. His parents aged. In his third year, Victor lost his father to a stroke. He felt like an adult for the first time. He had to take over the firm's affairs. His father left it to him. He understood things, but entrusted management to his father's old friend. He himself studied and supported his mother. She was fading after her husband's death. 3 years later, Victor finished his studies, took over the firm's affairs, just starting to gain confidence. Another blow. His mother died. He was left completely alone, in a huge empty house. Vera became his salvation. She had been in the house with Victor since childhood, replaced his mother. She had no children of her own, gave all her unspent tenderness to him. Work saved him, endless affairs, trips, negotiations. It distracted him from grief. Time passed. Victor turned from a young man into a strong, intelligent, shrewd businessman. Vera was proud of him. She wanted him to find a life partner, start a family, become a father. Then she would be at peace. But nothing was right, Vera said. Girls swarmed around him, handsome, rich. But Vera saw they were empty. They only wanted money, flirts. And then Lena appeared. Victor met Lena by chance on the street. She was rushing to an interview at his firm. She had been laid off, was looking for work. Victor had just gone out to buy donuts, and they collided, literally head to head. Lena's bag flew onto the asphalt, its contents scattered. They gathered them together. Lena apologized shyly. Victor, charmed by her grey eyes, calmed her. It was love at first sight. They looked up, smiled at each other. Victor was the first to say his name. They walked side by side, talking. When Victor learned where she was rushing, he understood. It was fate, not a chance meeting, but a gift. Vera had never seen him so happy. Lena was exactly the one. Intelligent, kind, understanding. She immediately got along with Vera. A wonderful girl. Why such a fate for her? 2 years later, they married. It was an ideal union. Love, respect, understanding. Vera was happy for them. They weren't in a hurry to have children, as if they had a premonition, Vera continued. They lived for themselves, travelled, and I kept grumbling like an old woman, "Don't delay." I wanted grandchildren so much. They lived for 5 years just for each other. They were happy together. Then Lena got pregnant. It was unexpected, but everyone was happy. "So, the time has come," Victor said. "Thank God," exclaimed Vera. "It will be a boy. You've become so beautiful, Lena. Girls take away beauty." But Vera was wrong. The ultrasound showed a girl, healthy. They showed me the picture. Vera could barely hold back tears. A spitting image of Lena, and she was born just like that, all her mother. Lena chose the name, Sonia. Everyone liked it. The pregnancy was difficult. Toxemia, high blood pressure, swelling. The baby developed well, but Lena faded, couldn't eat, lay flat. Vera brought food to the bedroom, felt sorry for her, assured her that everything would pass after childbirth. "Children are not easy," Vera sighed. "Pregnancy drained all her strength. Your sister Alice had children easily." Labour began long before term. Lena was in the hospital. They tried to stop it, uselessly. Sonia was born, didn't cry, wasn't shown to her mother, immediately taken to intensive care, a fight for life. Lena seemed fine after childbirth, tired, worried about her daughter. Doctors found nothing, sent her to a regular ward. Symptoms appeared later, but it was too late. Her heart stopped. A rare complication. Sonia was also in intensive care, premature. It was a terrible time. Victor and I were afraid for Sonia, Vera sobbed. So weak. And in the morning, Victor got a call saying Lena had died from bleeding. He didn't believe it, thought it was about Sonia. But it was Lena. Sonia survived, turned out strong, and Lena was gone. And with her, a part of Victor was gone. I thought he wouldn't survive, but he managed. He had to live for Sonia. Frankly, at first, he blamed Sonia for Lena's death, Vera continued. He treated her distantly, was angry, understood it was wrong, but couldn't help it. Sonia was discharged. They hired a nanny, but she couldn't handle it. I'm too old for newborns, but I gladly spent time with her, rocked her, played. I was the only one who gave her love. Her father was in the grip of grief at that time. She became like a granddaughter to me. Vera smiled. I loved her immediately, and Victor couldn't accept it for a long time. He provided everything for her, sometimes walked with her at my request, but without soul. And then Sonia became seriously ill, high fever, vomiting. Doctors gave no hope. That's when Victor woke up. He dropped everything, sat by her bed for days, sang, read, didn't let her out of his arms. And Sonia, as if feeling his love, began to recover. When she was discharged, he became different, a real father. Life improved. Victor worked, spent time with his daughter. Sonia grew into a healthy, intelligent girl. Everything was good. But Vera worried. Victor was alone. She wanted him to find a partner, but it was difficult. His chosen one had to accept and love Sonia. And God heard me, Vera smiled. Larissa appeared, beautiful, intelligent. She also has a daughter, Sonia's age. A good family formed. Larissa got a job at Victor's firm. It started at a corporate party. Larissa treated Sonia well, took the girls to parks, the cinema. Sonia loved Larissa and her stepsister Alina. She was happy. They got married, started living together. And then Sonia began to have strange symptoms: weakness, dizziness, nausea. The best doctors, clinics abroad, nothing helped. No diagnosis was made. The girl was fading. She held on for the first year, but after the new year, she was completely bedridden. Vera almost cried again. She's very ill. It's terrible to watch, and no one knows what this disease is. Larissa and Alina moved out. Alina goes to kindergarten, is constantly sick, and any infection is dangerous for Sonia. Larissa comes almost every day. Good for her. Brings Alina when she's healthy. That's how they live. The family separately. But what can you do? What a terrible story, Julia breathed out. She was shocked by the fate of this family, like a plot from a book. Yes, life is sometimes more complicated than in books, Vera shrugged. But you got along with Sonia. That's the main thing. It will be easier for you. The days went by. Julia settled in the room next to the children's room. Sonia often asked her to stay the night. They talked late into the night, holding hands. Julia felt the girl lacked simple human warmth, despite the abundance of adults around. Victor turned out to be a caring father and a pleasant conversationalist. They talked a lot about Sonia. He listened attentively. Julia met Larissa, a beautiful, striking woman, chiseled profile, graceful movements, a real socialite. But when she interacted with Sonia, adjusted the blanket, smiled, Julia felt a falseness. In the cold eyes, in the strained smile, something elusive but repulsive. One day Julia had a strange dream. She found herself in a dilapidated room, sitting by a dark window, understood it was a dream, wanted to wake up. And suddenly, Lena, Sonia's mother from the photos, appeared out of thin air. She smiled sadly, looked with warm, soft eyes. "Watch her," Lena whispered. "Larissa, she's dangerous. All troubles come from her." And she dissolved. Julia wanted to ask, how? Why? How is she dangerous? She woke up in a cold sweat, as if returning to her body from another dimension. The feeling was strange. Lena's words echoed in her ears. She didn't believe in mysticism, but this dream, it was too real. It wouldn't let go. The next day, Larissa didn't appear. Julia waited. She was sure. This woman was the source of evil. She didn't love Sonia. She was harming her. How could no one see it? Not even the wise Vera. Larissa arrived the next day, as always impeccable, bright. She went up to Sonia, then came down to the kitchen. "Sonia wants something to drink," Larissa said. "I'll make her cocoa." Vera offered help. "No, I'll do it myself. I want to do it for her." "You're so caring." Julia was silent, watching. Lena's words from the dream echoed in her head. She felt this was an important moment, as if Lena was nearby. Vera bustled about. Julia pretended to look out the window, but didn't take her eyes off Larissa. And then Larissa, with a quick, practiced movement, took a tiny vial from her sleeve, dropped a few drops into the milk, and hid it back. A moment, but Julia saw everything. "Cocoa is ready." Larissa smiled. "Julia, take the cup to Sonia." Julia took the cup. Her heart squeezed. Sonia shouldn't drink this. She had to do something. Julia pretended to stumble, bumped into Larissa. The cup slipped from her hands, fell, broke. The cocoa spilled. "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm so clumsy." Julia rushed to gather the shards, wipe up the puddle. Larissa grimaced. "It's nothing. I'll make a new one." Repeating the trick was impossible. It would arouse suspicion. Julia realized with horror, Sonia would drink this cocoa. While Larissa and Vera went up to Sonia, Julia quickly wrung out the rag into a small container. She needed to know for sure. What if it was just vitamins? But her intuition screamed otherwise. The test results were shocking. There was poison in the cocoa. Deadly. Sonia's symptoms were poisoning. Her stepmother was systematically killing her, like in a terrible fairy tale. Julia didn't know what to do, whom to tell. Vera? Victor? He might not believe her, accuse her herself. But there wasn't a minute to lose. Larissa couldn't be allowed near Sonia. She was a murderer. Julia decided to talk to Victor. She told him about the dream, about the cocoa, about the expert results. She was afraid of his reaction, that he would think she was crazy. You know, Victor looked at her intently. Anyone else in my place would have thrown you out. It sounds wild. But me, I also dreamt of Lena. She asked me to believe you, just to believe. Don't tell anyone. Take a leave of absence. I need to check everything. Vera will call. The days of waiting dragged on agonizingly. Julia didn't know what was happening. Her heart ached for Sonia. She had grown to love her. But Victor told her to wait. A call from Vera. Julia froze. Come, Vera just said. Sonia misses you. Julia arrived half an hour later. Victor opened the door, calm as always. Nothing betrayed the storm. Thank you, Victor finally smiled. You were right. Larissa, she tried to poison Sonia, that creature. Incredible, exclaimed Vera, and I believed her. The story turned out to be terribly simple. Greedy Larissa didn't want to share Victor's inheritance with Sonia. She wanted everything to go to her daughter, Alina. She was studying to be a pharmacist, lived off men. Her beauty was enough. Her knowledge helped her find a poison that was difficult to detect. She added it to Sonia's food. The girl was fading. I myself fed her that poison, Vera sobbed. Victor installed cameras. Larissa was caught red-handed. She added poison even to the food Vera prepared. Larissa was arrested. She was under investigation. Alina was taken by her father, whom Larissa considered unworthy. Alina will be fine, Vera said. The child is not to blame. And Sonia? Julia asked. And here's Sonia, a clear voice rang out. Julia turned around. Sonia stood in the doorway, pale, thin, but standing. A real miracle. Doctors promised a speedy recovery. Julia no longer needed the job, but she had grown accustomed to this house, to these people, didn't want to leave. The adults decided to hide the truth from Sonia. It was too horrific. But Sonia, intelligent beyond her years, understood everything. She overheard snippets of conversations, guessed, but it didn't break her. Like in a fairy tale, she said. Sonia recovered quickly. In September, she went to first grade. Julia re-enrolled in university, in distance learning, combining her studies with the job that had become life in a new family. Sonia, Vera, Victor. They had become family to her. It was warm, cozy here. They accepted her, were immensely grateful for saving Sonia. The thought of what could have happened without her intervention was frightening. They talked a lot about the dream. Vera believed it was Lena's spirit, breaking through time and worlds. Victor was silent, just shaking his head. Julia didn't know how to explain it. Maybe she intuitively disliked Larissa from the start. But the fact that Lena appeared in dreams to both her and Victor, it was inexplicable. One day, Julia left the house for university matters and ran into Robert. She couldn't believe her eyes, recoiled. He looked at her as if he had been searching his whole life. I found you, His voice trembled. He hugged her tightly. Julia didn't understand, but she clung to him, forgetting everything. The pain, the resentment, his disappearance. The explanation was simple and absurd. Robert dropped his phone in the ocean, had no connection, couldn't find her on social media. He wrote letters, sent telegrams. But Julia had moved. The letters piled up in the mailbox, which someone had opened and emptied. No news. She thought he had forgotten, betrayed her. "I couldn't just drop everything," he said. "It was a chance for us, for our future. It was unbearable without you, but I had to make it to provide for us. I didn't know how hard things were for you, about the loan, about the job." Everything turned out to be simple, a series of circumstances. Julia cried with happiness. There was no betrayal. There was love. The misunderstanding was resolved. Robert had a contract with a famous producer. Everything he dreamed of came true. Concerts, tours, recognition, and money. He bought them an apartment. It was being renovated. They got married, were expecting a child. Julia was happy, loved. She no longer worked for Victor. Sonia didn't need a caregiver anymore. But they remained close people, a real family. And now, in the children's store, among the pink and purple, Julia and Robert were choosing for their future baby